Hello, all you beautiful people, and welcome back to my little art channel. Today's video is a little bit different because I'm actually answering somebody's comment. Load Up Painter asked if I use acrylic markers, if the markers I'm using are acrylic markers. And well, the short answer to that is yes and no. Now, I know that might sound a little cryptic, but in this video, I'm going to break down exactly how I use acrylic markers in combination with my trusty alcohol markers to create the kind of look that you see in my artworks. So, if you've ever been curious about mixing these mediums, stick around. All right, let's dive right in. When I start a piece like this, I always begin with my alcohol markers. That's my first step. My first step is to lay down a fairly even coat of base color. And this helps to establish the overall tone of the area I'm working on. So here's a little tip though I've learned over time with alcohol markers. It's really super important to start coloring in the areas where you want the most saturated color at the end. Because as you work, you'll naturally go over your starting points more often. And that repeated layering is what builds up that rich, intense color. So plan ahead a little bit. And also, you need to let each layer of markers dry before you start the next layer. Otherwise, you'll just end up with a muddy mess and a paper that hates you. Okay, now once my base layer is completely dry and done, I'll go in with a secondary layer of alcohol markers to establish my initial shadows and to create some basic form and shape. This doesn't need to be very detailed at this stage, just enough to give the piece some depth, some definition, just a little bit of definition so long. Also, a complete side note, but if you hear some weird noise in the background, I'm really struggling to find space between thunderstorms and raining spouts to be able to record this voiceover. So we're gonna try and work with what we have. If it gets too loud, I'll stop for now. Okay, so for blending, I find that the opacity and the way that acrylic ink interacts with alcohol ink can create some really smooth transitions. You can really kind of use it to blend things. So I'll often apply a lighter shade of acrylic over a slightly darker area of alcohol marker, and then just kind of gently work it in. With gently, I mean like really not pressing very hard on the marker tip. It can often help to soften those hard edges you sometimes get with alcohol markers alone. Kind of just transition the shadows and the lighter parts of the picture. Just be mindful that acrylics are very opaque. So you're not really mixing the colors in the traditional sense. You're rather kind of layering one on top of the other and softening. They do absorb somewhat, but you'll be left with a lot of color still, as far as acrylic markers go, on top of alcohol markers. And then for the highlights. Yay! Acrylic markers are fantastic for adding those bright, crisp details that really make a piece pop because they're opaque. Again, they sit beautifully on top of the alcohol ink and give you that really defined, nicely smooth highlight. So going back to that original comment, can you or am I using acrylic markers? I am using acrylics and alcohol markers together in combination. And yes, absolutely, we can do that. We can do pretty much whatever we want to with art. That's the wonderful, beautiful thing about it. But are you using them in the same way? No, we're not using the alcohol markers and the acrylic markers in the same way. At least not in my process. I use alcohol markers for it's very similar to my painting process, like I use acrylic paint for the one part and then oil paint for another part. And I'm doing the same thing with my markers, using alcohol markers for that initial strong foundation and the depth that we start getting there. And then I use acrylics to refine and create transition between certain spots. So that's a little peek into how I combine these two very awesome mediums. And I hope that clears things up and that helps. I hope that answers the question. Let me know in the comments below if you've ever tried mixing these and what's your experience about that, and or if you have any questions about it, or about my process even. And don't forget to like the video if you found it very helpful, or at least somewhat helpful, and subscribe for more art tips and techniques and all things art like. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.